Turning now to Brazil, where there's an important free speech story surrounding Twitter and a big fight with Elon Musk. Let's put this up there on the screen. Brazil has now blocked Elon Musk's X after the company has refused to comply amid a feud with a federal judge. So this is a fascinating kind of a story that I had to delve into. Just anytime we see Twitter or X, so-called, or any social media company get literally blocked in a major country, it's important. But actually in Brazil, Twitter, YouTube, and social media plays a major outsized role, as I've learned from following Glenn Greenwald and kind of some of the other observers of what's happening. So this is actually especially important in a very large democracy, and of course, a place which is very nearby to the United States, and perhaps what it all means. So it all begins kind of with this one judge, I'm going to butcher these Portuguese names, so I truly apologize. I'm gonna go with Alexandre de Moura, a Brazilian Supreme Court justice, ordered the Brazilian telecom agency to block X from across the nation because the company, quote, lacked a physical presence in Brazil. This is after Twitter's office in Brazil did not comply with a court order to remove so-called, quote, X accounts that said broke Brazilian law. All of these orders are sealed currently. Twitter said that they will publish them. The justice also originally said that any person in Brazil who still tried to use X via VPN software would be fined some $9,000 per day. Now, I believe that has since been rescinded. The Lula government, though, has backed up this basically blocking of Twitter, and there's been a major showdown now between Elon and between the country of Brazil and its justice system. Let's put this up here as well. A friend of mine, Brendan Carr, he's actually one of the FCC commissioners, put out a really interesting analysis, and he says that the text of this 51-page decision to shut down X in Brazil is, quote, far more concerning and sweeping than headlines may suggest. In his own words, it makes clear that they are attempting to strike a broader blow against free speech in favor of authoritarian control. His opinion does not try to hide it. He comes out and points to Brexit and the 2016 election of Donald Trump as examples in his telling of, quote, the types of extreme populist outcomes that he is attempting to avoid by imposing a new censorship regime in Brazil ahead of the country's elections later this year. Quote, this type of censorship and political ideological nature is explicitly prohibited by Brazil's own constitution. Nonetheless, they argue that free speech on X, quote, cannot be allowed to continue because the diversity of political opinions expressed on the site might influence the people of Brazil ahead of their 2024 elections. In other words, he is arguing that free speech is a threat to democracy and that, quote, of course, the opposite is true. So he warns in his decision that they warned over the playbook of labeling political speech that runs contrary to his own orthodoxy is, quote, misinformation and disinformation. So there's a lot of seeds of a lot of the same debates that we have here, Crystal, and of course this is also affects our friend of the show, Glenn Greenwald, as well, who we're always thinking about here, and his safety as well. But it is extremely, it's concerning. And it is also perhaps a preview of especially what is to come with some major fights, especially with Elon's ownership over Twitter in countries where Elon does not want to comply with the current law.
Yeah, which is not all countries. Because
that's true.
he has succeeded to many government censorship requests. I'll get more to that in a minute. Just to back up a little bit where this fight originates, as best I understand, and let me admit, I am no expert in Brazilian politics. This is my simplistic understanding. Effectively, they had kind of akin to a January 6th situation. Bolsonaro lost the election to Lula. He denied those results. There was a whole spin-up of like Stop the Steal style activism online on places like Twitter, and culminated in this storming of a government building, again, kind of akin to January 6th. So in response to that, there was a crackdown on speech in Brazil. And, this ruling from this judge is part of that. By the way, it's worth mentioning that a larger panel of the Brazilian Supreme Court that I believe had 5 members on it unanimously backed up this judge. So there's been an attempt to kind of personalize it, make it just about this dude, but this larger panel also backed up the ruling and found it to be, grounded in Brazilian law. The specific thing that they're pointing to here is it all spawned from a request to take down certain accounts. Those accounts, as you mentioned, Sagar, the rulings of exactly which accounts they were, it was actually sealed. Elon has now actually doxed them and their real names and revealed who they were. They were all these Bolsonaro-aligned type of right-wing activists who the courts wanted them to block. There was a threat, apparently, that this is according to Elon, that their representative in the country could face personal arrest and prosecution. So he removes that legal representative from the country, and then that's actually the piece that triggers the suspension. Is under Brazilian law, if you are going to operate a social media platform in the country, you have to have a legal representative. Elon refused to name a legal representative of Twitter in the country, and so that's the specific thing that ends up sparking this whole situation. For the people of Brazil, there's no doubt that this is the VPN thing is crazy. Like, it's not clear how that would be enforced or if that's actually gonna, remain in effect, but the idea of fining people $9,000 to use a VPN, and that's a massive amount in any country, anywhere, but also, specifically in the country of Brazil.
Yeah.
Insane, given, I'd have to look up what the average median salary is per year there, but that's wild, right? And in the same way that when you ban Twitter, Telegram, WhatsApp in countries like China and countries like Russia, obviously it's a free speech issue for the people of Brazil. I think with regard to Elon, though, specifically, it makes more sense in the context of thinking of this as an ideological project. And the reason I say that is because, as I alluded to before, and we can put C3 up on the screen, when it was countries with leaders and political movements that were in charge that Elon is ideologically aligned to, he agreed to the censorship requests. He did it with Turkey, he did it with India. These were kind of the two most famous examples. When we interviewed Jack Dorsey, he made a point that was really important. That was actually that, listen, under my leadership, and there were all kinds of, issues that we criticized at the time, but they actually had a common free speech understanding. And they pushed back on more government censorship requests than Elon has now that he is, in charge of and owns Twitter. Some 83% of government censorship requests have been agreed to by Elon Musk. So you ask yourself, okay, well, what's different between Turkey and India and Brazil? And it's hard not to come to the conclusion that the difference is an ideological one. And so that's why in one instance he says, yes, I will help you, government of Turkey, government, Modi in India. And no, I will not in the country of Brazil. The other reason that I say that is because another thing we talked about at the time, Sagar, is that we disagreed with, by the way, at the time, and I continue to disagree with. His definition of free speech was, and this is how he justified those takedowns in India and Turkey, was, well, whatever the laws of the country are, that's what I have to follow, and that's my definition of free speech. He said this in particular in a big interview sit-down he did with BBC that you guys might remember. Let's take a listen to a little bit of that.
We have a responsibility to adhere to the law, and if people want the law changed, they should talk to their elected representative and get the law changed, and then we will adhere to the law.
Okay.
But if you want us to go beyond the law, that is us deciding to be censors. And I'm against censorship. I'm in favor of freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And freedom of speech only is relevant when people you don't like say things you don't like. Otherwise, it has no meaning.
So, sorry, that was actually the Don Lemon show. There was a different interview with BBC. We can put that up on the screen from CNN wrote up the interview. But he makes very similar comments about, he said he has no actual choice about government censorship requests and that their definition of free speech is effectively following the laws of whatever country. Now, you can see the problems with that because there are all kinds of repressive regimes around the country. You wouldn't want to be following, the laws of Saudi Arabia and consider that to be free speech. But that was his definition, at least when it came to countries where, he had a either business or friendly ideological relationship with the government. And it's different when it's Brazil because it's Lula and it's left-wing, and so he has an ideological disagreement with the government. So I think that that's, the best sort of frame to think about
It's probably ideology, but I think a lot of it is business too, with Elon. And that's part we'll never, this is always a problem with Elon. I've done a lot of stuff on this. One of the reasons why I'll never open his mouth about China, the most censorious government in the history of the world whenever it comes to social media, is that he has a massive commercial interest in China. In SpaceX and Twitter, it's not actually that big of a business bottom line, whereas India is what? The most populous country in the whole world. Elon literally had met with Modi. You could call it ideology. I would actually call it much more business. So he'll pick the fight whenever it both aligns with ideology and it isn't going to hurt him on his business bottom line. And this is all, I've always said this is a huge problem with him, is that he will and wants to comply with a lot of Chinese censorship, specifically because they have Tesla, the company. I mean, they could destroy them overnight anytime they wanted with their supply chain, with their batteries, and with Giga Shanghai specifically. So if you look at the problems that he has in that regard, it's really big. Nonetheless, I mean, like you said, we're going to take, I mean, like in this particular case, it's really bad.
Yeah.
The company, which I think to their credit, who has been the most consistent is actually Rumble. They have denied all censorship requests basically across the board.
They have
fought them in court. Chris Pavlovsky, the CEO of Rumble, actually put out, an interesting thing just about some of the history of both the Brazil case, but also many others which they have refused to comply with, many of which are complete BS, both in the UK, in France, all across the developed world. I think one of the reasons why this is really important, oh, by the way, I looked it up. GDP per capita in Brazil is $8,800. So $9,000 a day is quite literally the yearly average salary in Brazil. Insane. So if we think, though, about what this may mean in the future, is there is a big fight that is being set up, specifically in the developed world. It usually, the rules and the playbook may be a little bit more ham-handed in Brazil's, in Russia, in India, but, make no mistake, in France, in the UK, in Germany, perhaps maybe later this week I'll talk about, in Germany, the AfD winning its first state election since World War II. You just wait and see how those Scientology right-wing laws that are on the books, how they're going to try and be enforced there. So this has major, major political ramifications. And not only that, the EU regulatory regime, which is one of the most insane regulatory regimes in the world, is much more aligned with this kind of Brazilian view of things. And, in a certain sense, he's not wrong in terms of how populist, quote unquote, politics and others can bubble up through online and social media, because by definition, they have to circumvent the established powers. And then the damage that can be wrought. We watched this in the UK with the riots, where immediately they're charging and throwing people in jail for literally whipping up quote unquote bad sentiment online. And a lot of that was on Twitter. That's really scary.
To pick up on the business point, which is an important one, just to clarify one thing, Brazil is one of Twitter's largest markets.
Yeah.
So you might look at that and say, oh, well, he has a huge business interest.
Yeah, but
Twitter is not where Elon Musk is making his money. And so Twitter is basically, Elon bought it in the same reason that Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, as an ideological tool. I think we should think of Elon's ownership of Twitter in the same way we think about Rupert Murdoch's ownership of Fox News.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Good point.
It's an ideological tool. I mean, this is not, he can't even pretend to be a neutral actor at this point. He has endorsed Donald Trump. He is putting millions towards Trump's campaign. On Twitter, the algorithm has, really surfaces. And I don't think that this is actually, I agree with Ryan that this has been to their detriment and has convinced right-wing users that their viewpoints are more popular than they actually are, more prevalent, more influential than they actually are. But he's using Twitter as an ideological tool for the policies and type of governance that he wants to see. And so when you're thinking about these disputes that he's having with various countries, why this country, there's a dispute, why that country, he just accepts the censorship. I think you're right, the business piece is important to take into account as well, but then also, his goals for Twitter as an ideological tool are an important part of understanding what's going on there as well.
Yeah, that's smart. So anyways, it's a concerning situation. I'll continue to monitor it, and especially just thinking about, Glenn Greenwald being in Brazil and some of the dangers that all come with that. Always thinking about him and his safety. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.